Hello world, my name is Andy Silvers and today we're going to talk about Apple. Alright, so we've talked about a lot of computer related stuff on this channel, especially HP's mobile workstations, as they tend to be my favorite. If you've seen this channel, you know I'm a bit of an HP fanboy, but not without good reason. I really like what HP is doing with their products. And a lot of people out there are Apple fanboys, and they like what Apple's doing with their products. Overall, I don't really care for them enough to buy them as either a watch, a phone, a laptop, or desktop, but I do understand people who do. So in this video, I'm going to outline the 5 things I love about Apple and the 5 things I hate about Apple. But before I do that, I just want to let you know that I am an author, YouTuber, and filmmaker, and at this point in time, the channel is not currently monetized. So if you would like to support me directly, you can start by subscribing, of course, which I would appreciate. But you can also go to Amazon.com and pick up a copy of one of my several books that I have available. So this one is called Red Sprites and Blue Jets, and it is a coming-of-age story for children ages 8 to 12. I have another book called The Very Colorful Caterpillar, which is just like a really cute picture book for ages 3 to 6. It teaches colors and shapes in different foods and the life cycle of a caterpillar, obviously. And then I have a really exciting book called Solomon Grando versus the Jupiter Witch. It is a contemporary fantasy novella. It is really, really exciting and a lot of fun. Lots of magic, spells, potions, witches. The main character is a vampire. It's a lot of fun, especially for the Christmas season. If you know someone who loves to read and read adventures and fantasies in general, please check out Solomon Grando in the link in the video description. Alright, let's get this show on the road. I'm going to start talking about what I love so we can leave the juicy stuff for the end. So there are 5 main things that I love that Apple as a company does. This video is not really going to include the sort of socio-political aspects like the unfortunate situation in China. Instead, I'm going to focus just on the company as sort of a branding and actual product manufacturer. So the very first one, of course, is build quality. So Apple's computers, tablets, desktops, etc. tend to be built extremely well. They tend to use CNC aluminum or titanium, not CNC, but titanium for a lot of their products. And it shows. They tend to be extremely rigid. No flex in the keyboard decks of their laptops. And their phones tend to be fairly rigid, except for when they're not, ironically. But on average, Apple tends to create very rigid products. My belief is that Apple has to create really well-built products because they make so few products every year anyway that they kind of can't afford not to. Because HP, Lenovo, Dell, Asus, all these other companies make so many different products that they can afford to have a lineup that's like the cheaper one, you know what I mean? That doesn't cost as much and therefore is a bit more flexible and bendy, shall we say. But Apple makes so few products overall that they kind of can't afford that. And they're also trying to sort of make themselves into sort of a luxury brand, or at least a high-end consumer brand. So that's the first one. The second thing that I love about Apple is that they're constantly pushing technology. And they really are. When you consider the different ways that they create their computers, desktops, phones, I mean, it's a miracle how much faster their iPhones get every year, despite the fact that most people don't necessarily need that kind of performance. They push artificial intelligence, they push their camera technology, they're pushing OLED screens to do new things. But the main thing I want to focus on, of course, is Apple Silicon. Right? The Apple M1 and now M2 are extraordinarily powerful, and in the mobile space, they compete with last generation's Intel, say Core i9-11900H, pretty well. So it's one of those things where they came out of nowhere with their own Apple Silicon and managed to either match or in some cases beat the competition. And it's worth noting that these are what are called ARM processors. And Microsoft already tried this. They've already created 1 or 2 ARM processors for some of their other devices, like the Microsoft Surface Pro X. But that tablet was a disaster because the performance just wasn't there, and Windows 10 on ARM just was not a success. But Apple figured out a way, because everything, I think partially because everything is in-house, they figured out a way to make the Apple OS, the sort of Mac OS operating system, work incredibly well with ARM. If you want to do a bunch of gaming, ARM's not the best for you, and there are still some specialty software that just doesn't quite have an ARM native version, but they have to go through Rosetta. But with all that said, ARM is an incredible achievement, and Apple does push technology in a lot of ways, including, for instance, mini LEDs on the iPad. I'm not aware of any other tablet with a mini LED display, and they also have mini LEDs now on their flagship MacBook Pro. So again, they really do like to push technology. The third thing I love is the boxy design. So basically, one of the reasons I love the HP ZBook Fury G8, which is the one I have right over here, is because it has a boxy design. I really appreciate that look. And Apple tends to do this a lot too. You obviously know they did it with their phones recently, starting with the iPhone 12. They went back to the iPhone 5 and 4 sort of boxier shape, which I really love. And they also implemented a boxier shape on the MacBook Pros, although they did revert back to a rounder shape recently. But I just love technology that has a boxier feel. I just think the angular finish just really looks aesthetically pleasing. And this is no more evident with the iPad. The iPad Pro, starting like in 2018, had this new boxy design, and I really, really like it. Also, it allows Apple to maximize the internal space of the device, because in those edges, you can't put a whole lot in there in terms of battery or processor or anything, because it's just too thin. But with the boxier design, they maximize the internal space of the iPad and devices that are like it. So again, the boxier, more angular aesthetic is something that I generally appreciate, and Apple tends to do that quite a bit. The next thing that I love about Apple is their interconnected tech. So what I mean is the way that everything speaks to each other, the iPhone, the iPad, the Apple Watch, all these different devices, Apple TV, they all speak to each other. Now, to be fair to Android and to some extent Windows, you can get almost any device to speak to each other, quote unquote. The difference is that the way Apple does it is they're speaking to each other through the hardware and software that Apple themselves made, which is what makes it so convenient. You log in once and everything is basically synchronized. Whereas on a Windows device or Android tablet, it's a little bit different. You log in to the device and it's not synchronized till you log into your accounts. Then it's synchronized. So it's an extra step. And I know that sounds lazy not to do the extra step, but I mean, to be fair, if you have a music account and a YouTube account and all these different accounts that may not use Gmail, then it can be a little inconvenient. And Apple, generally speaking, does a great job of allowing their devices to interconnect. You get a text on your iPhone and it appears on your Apple Watch. That's one of the things that other companies have slowly begun to do, but they had to catch up to Apple first. And this last one may seem like a cheat, but I can assure you it's not, and that is that Apple has the best tablet ever, the iPad. The iPad truly is revolutionary. And it still sells quite well to this day. In fact, Apple owns, I believe it's 40-something% of the market share. I do know they own the vast majority of the market share for tablets right now, with Samsung being a somewhat distant second. And I think the reason for this is because it's just such an incredible device. It gives you the Apple experience in terms of operating system and technology, but it's still very much a tablet like any other tablet. And of course, there's the incredible App Store that the iPads offer, which gives you endless games and apps and such. So if working professionals can use it to do a little bit of drafting and design, let's say, and kids can use it to play Angry Birds or whatever. It just has a lot of amazing apps available. And then the technology and design are amazing. I've already mentioned the boxy design I really like. But also, mini LED, the iPad Pro with mini LED is an incredible way to watch a lot of different kinds of content, particularly Netflix, Amazon Prime, YouTube. It's just an incredible all-around device. When they started making the iPad more for artists, they added the ability to use the Apple Pencil and then the Apple Pencil 2, which many artists will tell you is the second best after like Wacom's higher-end pencils or pen styluses and digital displays. I mean, Apple came out of the gate and was already one of the top picks for artists on their first try with the original iPad Pro and Apple Pencil, and now it's been improved. And I just think that the iPad overall is a wonderful device. That doesn't mean it doesn't have shortcomings like the lack of a headphone jack, but it is overall the best tablet you can realistically get. Alright, now it's time to spill some tea, or more likely throw some shade. Overall, the things that I hate about Apple are strong enough to convince me not to purchase from them, but obviously, if you disagree with any of these points in the comments, or you have a correction, something I said that was factually incorrect, please let me know. I'm not adverse to discussing the videos in the comment section if you have any questions or comments. Just keep them cordial. So the first thing I hate about Apple is that they solder everything. So it makes sense they're soldering everything on their iPhones because that's what pretty much every smartphone company is doing. The only real exception would be, well, I mean, there's a few probably, but one of the exceptions I'm aware of is the Samsung Galaxy X-Cover Pro and the new X-Cover 6 Pro, which you may have never heard of. Those phones actually have the back can pop off with ease, and then you can replace the battery and the microSD card and the SIM cards with relative ease. So it's very much an easy-to-access system. But in the past several years, Apple has soldered down everything. So you can't use, for instance, SODIMM memory in the MacBook Pros. This is particularly a problem for me because that's the product I would be most likely to buy, is the MacBook Pro, because it's a laptop that can be used like a mobile workstation, like this one. I had the MacBook Pro 16 and 14 on my radar when I was looking to buy a new device, and I ended up going with HP, in part because Apple just didn't quite impress me with how I couldn't upgrade literally anything. Not the RAM, it was on the chip. Not the SSD or storage, it was on the chip. I couldn't, even the battery, while it was, I think, upgradable, was very difficult to upgrade. It wasn't as easy as just some screws and then pop it out. It was a little bit more integrated. There's just this general lack of upgradability across all of Apple's devices, and this gets to be worse when you get to their desktops. So the new like Mac Pro little looks like a Mac Mini, but it's a taller now. That one's even worse because my research shows that while the SSDs kind of can be removed, you can't add more storage yourself, I don't believe, or even add another SSD from another computer or something, because Apple has it basically into the BIOS that it will reject it. It just literally will not allow you to use another SSD. And they're not proprietary, or they're not rather universal M.2 SSDs like this laptop offers. They're these proprietary Apple SSDs. And of course that's super duper irritating and unhelpful, because for a desktop like that does have enough room for it and is designed towards creative professionals, I would expect it to be more upgradable. And it just isn't. And there's a bevy of devices I could go through that I won't, that where everything is soldered down, and it's really irritating and unnecessary. So it's just something you have to be aware of. And if you're like me, being able to, if you have an extra $200 and you want to buy another 2 terabytes for your laptop, you just can't. You just literally can't. So that's another thing that really annoys me. The next thing is that Apple refuses to use NVIDIA. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know that Apple has a sort of legal feud, I believe it is, with them. I don't know all the details, but what I do know is that it's not just that Apple doesn't use NVIDIA, it's that they basically just ignore NVIDIA like they don't even exist. That's where there's kind of a problem. So, obviously, Apple doesn't use NVIDIA in the full-sized Mac Pro. By the way, the last set, when I said Mac Pro, I meant Mac Studio. That was my mistake. Anyway, in the new Mac Pro, which is their giant cheese grater desktop, they only use Intel Xeon CPUs, which unfortunately have been behind for the past several years since AMD came out with the Threadripper and EPYC lineup. And The problem is that they don't use AMD for the CPUs, even though they absolutely could. And then as far as the GPUs, they only use AMD's GPUs, but some of them, in fact most of them, do not test well in terms of benchmarks against NVIDIA's 30 series, or even to some extent the 20 series ray-traced GPUs. They just don't test well. But here's what's interesting. In the new, or they're not new anymore, but in the Mac Pro desktop, they had the PCIe slots where you could theoretically put in your own NVIDIA GPU. Like, don't have Apple do it. You do it. That's fine. But you can't. Because even though I believe NVIDIA did release the drivers, Apple just shuts them out. You literally cannot use an NVIDIA GPU in the Mac Pro, despite the fact that it's a crazy, giant, powerful desktop. In fact, you can't even use NVIDIA's passively cooled GPUs. So I don't think you'd want to. I think you'd probably want something a little bit more active for that. But you can't do it. Even though it'll fit, it just isn't supported. Because Apple just has this sort of beef, if you will. And they refuse to acknowledge NVIDIA or try to come to some sort of agreement so that we, the consumers, can have a better overall product experience and, of course, more options. The other thing I hate is the lack of obvious ports on many of their devices. So the iPhone refuses to use USB-C, even though every other company basically on Earth uses them. Even budget phones have USB-C. Now, I know that Apple is going to, it looks like they may start using USB-C in some European markets, but until it's a widespread thing for Apple's phones, I'm not going to, this complaint still stands. The iPhone 14 does not have USB-C. The 13, it's just a problem because you don't want to have to carry around a custom cable just for your iPhone when you can use USB-C for a lot of the MacBooks, not all of them, but a lot of them. You can use USB-C for the iPad. You can use it for a lot of your other devices. I mean, it's just kind of irritating and unnecessary. And ironically, adds to e-waste, right? Because now you have to purchase the lightning cable, or maybe two, because you probably want an extra one, and then that packaging is being thrown away when you could just use the USB-C cables you already own. So it's unfortunate. And of course, the headphone jack. Sony with the Xperia lineup has kept the headphone jack on their phones for now, and a few other companies have as well. The Xcover Pro from Samsung, I mentioned, still has a headphone jack, but Apple ditching it on their phone was a big problem, in my opinion, and it led other companies to do it too. Remember Apple did it first. So it was a big problem because it's not that you always need a headphone jack, but when you need it, you really need it. So it's just something that I think that Apple could have done. And of course, there's the obvious example of like the starting in like 2018-ish, I think it was, the new MacBook Pros only having USB-C ports, despite the fact that they were clearly thick enough for an SD card slot. Yes, okay, Ethernet couldn't have fit. A lot of mini display port probably couldn't have fit, maybe. But SD card is about the thinnest port there is. It's about the same vertical height as USB-C. And they still didn't put it on there, whereas Dell did. Dell with the XPS 15 and 17 did put an SD card on their very thin devices along with USB-C. But Apple did not, until recently. So Apple, it looks like it's getting better, but in the meantime, it is still reasonable to complain about Apple's lack of ports overall. The next complaint is that Apple is very anti-partner. So if you're the kind of person who needs to go to, let's say, an Apple repair store or an Apple certified repair store to get a replacement battery or replacement cable or module or something, it's going to be really difficult to do because what happens is Apple will not allow their partners, as far as I understand, to hold parts just in the back room, so to speak. You have to wait around for them to be shipped to the repair store, and then they have to be the ones to put it into the device for you. And this has been a thing for years. Apple has been the target of a lot of right-to-repair controversy, and rightfully so. They make it very difficult to repair anything yourself. They make their devices difficult to open, and when you do open it, you can barely do anything, unlike with the exact opposite kind of product like a ZBook, where at least in theory, the CPU and GPU are even upgradable. It's not easy, but you can do it. But Apple, there's nothing that can be upgraded by the user. Of course, there's the whole controversy with the cable the Apple cable that comes in the new Studio Display. It's not the Studio Display XDR, it's the other one, which name escapes me at the moment, but it's $1,600. And there was a whole controversy that the cable was almost impossible to remove, which is stupid on a desktop monitor, because you may need a longer cable, or the cable may get chewed up by the cat or ripped up by the vacuum or something, and now you have to replace the whole monitor or pay, of course, Apple a bunch of money to fix it for you. It's really irritating, and I don't think I've pretty much ever seen a modern company make a cable that difficult to remove. It's just completely unnecessary and stupid. And again, they're just very much anti-partner. They tend to not allow partners access to their information. They tend to keep them in the dark on a bunch of stuff. And of course, they refuse to allow them to speak about these kinds of issues so that the public can make up their own mind of whether or not they like having the MacBook that cannot be fixed. And then the final complaint is a bit of a stretch, but again, I think it's fair. It's basically Apple's self-indulgent nonsense. So Apple has a tendency to think of themselves as better than they actually are as an overall corporation. You remember the famous line, "We have the courage to remove ports." They didn't say that last part, but they talk about how they have the courage to do stuff. I'm sorry, but you're a company that makes products for consumers. It's not courageous to make a new phone that you're going to make lots of money on. That's not courage. There are rare times when companies do show courage, but it's pretty uncommon. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's also, for example, the fact that Apple refuses to acknowledge that competition exists in most cases. So a lot of their ads, they'll say how the new phone or new tablet is 13% faster, but it's always in their other device. They ignore other manufacturers in most of their marketing materials, like they don't even exist, like they think they're their only competition. Who would even consider a Samsung? Who would consider a Sony? Except for, me and a lot of other people. And so it's just this idea that Apple is just the greatest of all time and everyone should just be happy with whatever they give you. Also, that extends to, for instance, the Apple Book, which is an older product now. I think it came out in 2016. But you remember, it was like a $300 book with just a bunch of pictures of Apple products and how amazing they are. And yes, Apple has good products. The problem is other people should be making that book. Apple should not be creating a book celebrating their own genius. It's a bit narcissistic and unnecessary. And then charging that much money for it, for you to have the privilege of celebrating Apple and their amazingness. And then, of course, there was I don't remember which phone it was, but it was the iPhone. And they basically, when the sound quality wasn't very good on phone calls, they said, "You were holding it wrong." It's just ridiculous. They refuse pretty much always to acknowledge their design issues. Now, they will occasionally fix it, like with the butterfly key switches, but they don't typically acknowledge there was a mistake. They just fix it kind of behind the scenes, which is sort of self-indulgent because, again, it's like one of those narcissistic things where they refuse to acknowledge their own mistakes, that they have any problems at all. And there's so many other examples that I want to get to. If you have any examples of Apple sort of just acting like they're the greatest thing to ever exist, please list them in the comments. Or if you disagree and you think Apple is the humblest company ever in the history of history, please let me know that in the comments too. I'm happy to have a fair, honest discussion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like the video and subscribe, and please check out my books. They're all available at the link in the video description, and I am working on a new one right now, a contemporary drama. I'm not going to reveal the title yet, but it's a contemporary drama, and it's in development, and I'm also working to develop that into a short film. So that's really exciting. I really do have a lot of cool things going on behind the scenes. Anyway, thank you for checking out this video. I'll see you in the next one.